And now so is my mic. Hello, everybody. I am on, and I am Dr. Annette Feravich with Healthy Mind, Body, Spirit. And you can find me on the internet at www.healthymindbodyspirit.net. So, as you can see, just a little bit late today, but that's okay because that's not unusual. And maybe that will help you guys get here with me and visit with me. So I'm still probably missing just a couple things. So, but that's okay. As you can see, I decided today to do a talk. So, Merry Christmas, and I hope that you had a wonderful Christmas yesterday. It's December 26th, and as you can see, I'm still trying to get my bearings about me. But in the last few days, I have been thinking about what I wanted to talk to you about today. After Christmas, and I hope that you checked out some of my other videos that I have. You can always find me on YouTube and my other videos at Dr. Annette Feravich on YouTube, and again, you can find me also on my website, although most of my brand new videos will be on YouTube. So, thank you for joining me, and please subscribe because that really helps, especially if I'm talking about things that interest you. I really try and talk about things that I think are very current and going on, and also I think I talk about things that are just a little bit cutting edge as far as what's going on with politics and current events and those kinds of things. And as you all know, I also try and incorporate is the word I'm looking for. I also try and incorporate all kinds of things that have to do with our mental health, that have to do with our physical health, and that have to do with our spiritual health. Since it's the holiday season, I've really been talking a lot about our spiritual health. And last week I did a special on Does God Have a Name? So check that out. As you know, if you've been following me at all, I am working on editing these videos. And so if you see the edited version, you're not going to see all of this upcoming stuff that I have for you. You'll only really get to the meat of it. And I don't blame you for waiting for the edited version. I would, because some of these get kind of long. I hope this one's a little bit shorter today for you. So if you take a look at the live version, that would be great too. Okay, I want to make sure, one of the things I'm not doing is I'm not recording this, and that makes my heart almost stop. But I want to see what the video looks like. And so I know that it's recording on YouTube, and so that's all I need to do. And so, that's really nice as well. Okay, all right, so now, today, what am I talking about? I am talking about nuances. And the reason why I decided to talk about that, let me go ahead and get my slideshow up there. And the reason why I wanted to talk about nuances was because I've been hearing this phrase a lot lately. And one of the times I heard about it, one of the times that I've recently heard this phrase used was it was used in The Chosen. So the video The Chosen, the Christmas special, I watched that. It's wonderful. It's a wonderful place to get Christmas music. I was listening to Christmas music, and we were all not just listening, of course we're listening, but singing in the movie theater, all the songs. So I appreciate my friends who took me out, and we all went to see that. One of the readers, one of the narrators in that talked about nuances and understanding nuances, and it's come up a couple more times. And so, I always ask for God's guidance and the Holy Spirit to guide me on some of these. And so this is the topic that I picked, and I hope you appreciate it, and I hope that you don't get turned off by my motivation for talking to you about some of these things. So, nuances and why nuances and well, let's first of all, before we get to a little bit any more of this, let's take a look at a definition of nuances and get started there, right? Okay, so nuances, this is an awareness of subtle differences in value, feeling, or meaning. Okay, this is interesting. So let's just take a look at, first of all, in value. What do we mean by nuances in value? Well, when we, as scientists in particular, what do we do in order to be able to manipulate something in an experimental fashion, right? Or even look at associations, what do we need to do? We need to make the terminology or whatever it is that we're looking at measurable. It has to be measurable. It has to have a value. How can I possibly say that smoking is related to lung cancer unless I have equated some value on both smoking, for example, and lung cancer, right? So I have to put some value in order to be able to see if there's an association. So we can mean being able to tell differences between slight values, right? Subtle differences in values. So using that same example, of smoking and lung cancer, which is a good example, because we did see many subtle associations, a subtle relationship. It wasn't apparent. It wasn't that somebody smoked a cigarette and we saw the smoke go into their lungs and create a tumor. No, what we had to do is we had to look at nuances is what we had to look at in order to then determine what to measure. And then in order for us to scientifically say, yes, those values are different. So isn't this interesting, right? What are we doing? We're trying to find subtle differences, and we're trying to determine whether or not we can perceive those subtle differences. And what we can do then also is we can compare that to an actual measure. Let me give you another example. So if I were to look at two different colors of blue, for example, there's a value on one blue, right? It can be like a Pantone color, right? So it's got a value, a literal value to it. And then there could be a slight subtle difference in the shade of a different blue value. We can even see that when we take a look at the colors in this PowerPoint slide. So here we can see there are certain areas of blue that become very distinct from the areas of white. But then as we begin to get over into the darker recesses of this picture, it becomes less and less apparent the different values in, are we getting into blue and how much are we beginning to get into black, right? So there are values in those colors that differentiate one blue from another, for example, right? And our eyes perceive that, right? So our eyes perceive those differences, and sometimes as we get older, our eyes are less able to perceive those differences. Can it be the same kind of thing? I had to make sure I'm still on. Can it be the same kind of thing with mental perceptions as well, right? Where there are certain facts and situations that become less and less apparent, and the skill as a human being becomes, are we able to still determine subtle differences in those circumstances? It's the thing that our judges do, for example. We rely on them to interpret the Constitution and then build law around that based on understandings, right? Subtle differences in the law, and understanding through discourse and discussion. It's what we need in order to determine those nuances, those differences, right? Because each one of us have got a certain set of skills, which is what we're going to talk about, certain capacity to understand those nuances. And if we push our agenda for our capacity and understanding, for example, of whatever's going on, those nuances that we're trying to understand in a court case, for example, what we end up doing is losing our ability to catch those nuances. So when we force our abilities to perceive nuances, for example, subtleties and differences, but what we're doing is we are willing our interpretation of that, what we're going to end up doing is missing the nuances. And so, interestingly enough, nuances, as we're going to talk about, can be learned, but they really cannot be pushed as in an agenda, because otherwise they escape us, right? So this is kind of interesting, almost like a quantum physics kind of a thing, that when we attend to the nuance, they escape us. So interesting. All right, so that's what we want to talk about. I want to bring in a couple examples, and I think that this will also help us understand a little bit of these kinds of, to have a better understanding of how we define nuances. I started talking about judges and judges making their decisions. And right now we have got judges who are making decisions on, for example, Roe versus Wade. And what they have to do, and this is a very difficult case, because why? Because there are so many nuances that have to be considered. And when we get a court system that sees things one way and pushes an agenda, what it actually will end up doing, as I've already said, is missing the nuances that need to be addressed. So, for example, some of the nuances that I'm unsure are being addressed are things like what happens when a young person, like a young girl who's age 13, gets raped, in particular by, most often what occurs is a family member or somebody that they know that's close to them. So that's what occurs most often, in particular at that young age. And so now you have got a law that may force a 13-year-old to carry a pregnancy through full term, which very apparently her body may not be able to do or be ready to do. And in particular, in those kinds of circumstances, is the infant getting the resources that the infant needs from the mother if the mother doesn't have the resources to get the things that the infant needs. So again, the point here is the battle that the Supreme Court has to do and trying to understand all of those subtleties, and once again, how those subtleties will escape us when we push our agenda. Subtleties disappear when we try and specifically and intentionally address them, or because when we address the subtleties of something, usually what we're trying to do is move those subtle lines is what we're trying to do. Okay, so let's keep going with this. And hopefully you know by now that a lot of times I give you a really long introduction, and then what I do is I speed up my slides, but I'm able to do that because I've given you a number of examples, which I'm going to try and continue to do. Yeah, I think I closed down one of my sessions over here that I needed, but that's okay. I'll find it. Okay, so The first question is then, whenever I take a look at any of the questions, and I think that this is very helpful to you, no matter what the questions are, when we're trying to take a look at big questions, what makes a person violent or aggressive, right? What makes a person more depressed or more sensitive than somebody else? What makes a person commit suicide, right? What makes so why do we end up, in particular, some philosophical questions, or why is there meaning? Why do we seek meaning in life, for example? Or why do we want to be happy? So even questions that are very philosophical kinds of questions. What is the meaning of life? Why are we here? There are two aspects or two approaches and two perspectives that we want to consider. And it's a nature-nurture perspective. And of course, when we talk about a nature-nurture perspective, all of us are basically used to that question. We're all used to that question. Is this a nature or nurture? And so our answer, of course, because we're educated, most of us pretty much would be able to say it even no matter, without any formal education. We know the answer to that. It's a combination of both. It's not all nature and it's not all nurture. But as a scientist, what we want to do is we want to approach that question from both of those angles in order to determine the nuances of any behavior that we are addressing. Okay, all right, so are we hardwired to see nuances? And so when I say hardwired, what I'm saying there is it in our genetic makeup to see nuances rather readily? And the answer to that is yes, because if we had to learn it, it would be very purposeful. And as we said, when it's purposeful, when we're trying to get the nuances on purpose, right, they escape us. So we must have this kind of universal innate tendency to pick up on nuances. And we know psychologically that this is true. So for example, what do we rely on? We heavily rely on nonverbal behaviors in order to pick up or understand some of those nuances. I'm going to move up to a slide here. No, I'm not going to move up to that slide yet because it's not really about that. So some of the things that we know that we pick up on is we pick up on subtle nonverbal cues. So think about, for example, when you know that there's chemistry between you and somebody else. Okay, so there's an attraction, and you know that person is attracted to you, and you really haven't had to say a whole lot other than there's this sort of, uncomfortableness that you see in the other person, right? You can see it in the other person and you feel it in yourself, right? So you kind of are having this mutual emotional or shared emotional experience, right? Well, a lot of that wasn't chosen, especially in that specific event that I was talking about, right? Those things weren't chosen for you. And so that kind of chemistry is reliant on our central nervous system and our peripheral nervous system, right? And also our autonomic, our heart starts beating, right? We start sweating. So that's automatic. That occurs automatically. And then that instigates hormones that go running through our bloodstream, okay? All right, well, we had nothing to do with that. And nobody said, hey, I'm attracted to you. And in fact, it really seems interesting about kind of the evolution of that dating experience, right? Throughout all time, did we not explain that? Did it ever have to be explained what they're feeling? And then it what? Then it was suppressed as we evolved? Very interesting kinds of questions that I like to ask to try and make sense of. So, Are we hardwired to understand these nuances? Well, we do understand a lot of nonverbal behavior. And maybe stop and think about all kinds of nonverbal behavior that you probably pick up on. But we're going to talk about the learning aspect. But just right now, maybe take a few moments and think about some of the nonverbal behaviors that you readily pick up on. Okay? So, do you readily pick up on hostile behaviors? So you readily pick up on when other people are acting more angry or hostile? Or do you readily pick up on when other people are feeling sad or lonely? Or are you a person who doesn't pick up on cues very readily at all, that you don't pay attention to certain things very readily at all? Maybe you're that kind of a person, right? Are you the person who readily picks up on, artsy fartsy kinds of things, right? So do you look for the beauty in things? Do you happen to perceive intelligence readily in somebody else, right? So there are things that you pick up on nuances for, okay? And let's think about that, right? All right, so some of those things would likely be hardwired, right? But some of them likely are learned. So let me give you an example. So if you're a builder, for example, you might be a builder, you are going to pick up on the subtleties of your area of expertise. If you're a roofer, right? So you're going to pick up and you're going to look down the road and you're going to pick up automatically on good roofs, good quality roofing and bad quality roofing, right? You are going to pick up on beautiful decks if that's what you do, right? So you see here that what feels very familiar to you, where it's easy for you to pick up on nuances, can be very different for other people. And so what this suggests, of course, is that there are not only learned aspects, that there are not only genetic aspects of our picking up on nuances, but there are also learned aspects of that. Now, I don't want to get too far ahead because there's a couple things that I want to show you that's going to give you the nuance between those two things and how they interact, right? The nuance between what seems to be very automatic for most of us, universal for most of us, but not all of us, and what are other things that may have been learned along the way. All right, so let's take a look at some interesting experiments that have been done. Because after all, I'm not only a doctor of psychology, I'm also a scientist. Wish I would have looked at my hair before I did all this. Okay, and see, those are the fun things that you miss if you don't visit me live. All right, so let's take a look at a couple studies that have been done. This first study that I want to point out is very familiar. Most people have learned it in Psych 101, but if I give you a couple of visuals, it might help you remember it. So you can see this study was done in 1959, and this was a classic study that was done by Fessinger and Carl Smith. Fessinger and Carl Smith. So what they did was they had people come into the lab and let me make sure I said this so for the recording, the video and things like that. And this is a classic study. And so remember, not all studies have to be the most current studies to be able to get a lot of very interesting points across in the study. And this is a wonderful study that was done without really blurring any lines between ethics in doing the study. And let me tell you something, that is very rare, as we see when we are taking a look at some of possibly my LinkedIn posts that we see how we are beginning to blur the lines of ethics. But a very good study that we have here. So what they had individuals do, participants came in and they did very mundane, very boring tasks that they had to do. And so some of the tasks included taking and putting many different pegs into the right holes. And then also, I'm going to move around here for a minute so you're going to hear some disturbing noises if you're on. Not too disturbing though. Thank God. So putting these pegs in these holes, a very boring and mundane task. And then what they also had to, and then they went and followed that very boring and mundane task with another very boring and mundane task. And so what they had to do was they had to turn each one of those pegs, you can see in the bottom picture there, individuals, participants in the study had to turn each one of those pegs a quarter of a turn. And so they went through each one of those rows and had to turn them in a quarter of a turn. All right, so that's kind of, an interesting study. Very boring task. And then what they had to do next was they had to then, the researcher asked them, they said, I understand that, that was a pretty boring task, but I'm really having a hard time getting people to participate in these tasks because they're so boring. And so what I'm hoping that you'll do is there's a participant there who is coming into the study, and if you could please tell that person that this was an interesting study. So here we have a lie is what we have. So if you could lie to the participant who's coming into the study and tell them that this was an interesting task. And I just got to check out my video and see if it's casting the way it's supposed to be. And then participants got paid 2 different sums of money. Some participants got paid $1 in order to lie. While other participants got paid $20 to lie. All right? So let's take a look at that then. And then the question is, and then afterwards, they were asked about their attitudes about the study. All right? So attitudes about the study would likely be, this is a very boring study. They took every effort to make this study look extremely boring, right? Okay. And then they paid you money to lie. They paid you $1 to lie, or they paid you $20 to lie. And then they asked you about your attitude about the study. And who do you suppose had a better attitude about the study? The participant who was paid $1 or the participant who was paid $20 to lie? Now, it would seem that the person who got paid $20 to lie would have the better attitude. I got paid $20 to lie, so that's a great study, right? That's very intuitive, but that's not what ended up happening. So let's take a look at this. So what we see here is so again, they were rating what they thought of the task. And that's kind of interesting, right? They were rating what they thought of the task, not of the actual study, but of the task. So the enjoyment rating of the task. There are individuals who didn't lie. So that's our control group, right? They didn't have to lie. They came in, they did the task, and then they were asked how enjoyable was that task, okay? And you can see there that they found it the least enjoyable. Those individuals who were paid $20 to lie, look at that though. They also found that significantly less enjoyable, in particular when you compare it to the individuals who were paid $1 to tell the lie. So they both had the same tasks. Individuals who were paid $20 had the same task as individuals who were paid $1. They both had the task and they both had to lie to the participant. But in their enjoyment ratings, the people who were paid $1 said they enjoyed the task more. Okay. Let's take a look at why this might be. What Fessinger and Carl Smith said was that individuals who were only paid $1 to lie, it wasn't worth it for them to lie. That's an easy that's an easy sale for morality, right? Most people hopefully would sell their soul, would tell a lie for a whole lot more than $1. But if I'm paid $20 to tell a lie, that's worth it to tell a lie, right? $1, not worth it. I lied for $1. $20, worth it. Why did you lie? I lied because I got paid $20. Why did you lie? I lied because I got paid $1? No, I didn't lie. One of those two things have to change, right? It either has to be, the truth of the matter is, it has to be that yes, I would lie for $1, or I didn't lie. And so why is it that individuals, according to Fessinger and Carl Smith, why is it that these individuals changed their attitude, had a significantly different attitude? It's because they changed their attitude about the task. And why did they change their attitude about the task? Because otherwise they would have to look at themselves in a light that says, I would lie for $1, right? So there are the nuances. There are the nuances there of human behavior. And when we see that a significant number of individuals would change their attitude rather than admit that they are lying, we can see that we are hardwired then to sort of dance to these nuances that are inside of us and that are hardwired. We know how to react to these hardwired nuances that are inside of ourselves. And what's the nuance? The nuance is, I better not lie for $1. I can lie for more money, but I better not lie for $1, right? And a lot of our information on picking up nuances in other people have to do with whether or not those individuals are lying or not lying, right? Why might we be good liars? Because the reality is, it might no longer be a lie. All right, so it kind of gives you an idea of some hardwired nuances, but also some things that we have learned over time as well, right? Not everybody reacted in the same way, right? We are not all going to change our opinion about something because to cover up our lie, right? But these are interesting things to kind of pick up on the nuances of nuances. That's what I should have called this. I might change the title slide. The nuances of nuances. Okay, moving on. Here's another study that was done. Actually, first, before I get into that study, I want to read a couple other stats on this whole study that was done by Fessinger. So, what he also found was that any two thoughts that we've got, the two thoughts here are the attitude and then that I have about the task and the attitude I have about myself. Lying. All right, any two thoughts can be, he calls them dissonant. Go see my video that I have in self-esteem, in my series on self-esteem, that's on cognitive dissonance. You need to see that slide since that's not really what I was talking about, right? So Fessinger said that any ideas that we have in our heads can create this kind of uncomfortable feeling that we have. Ideas that we have in our heads that don't work. He calls them, they're incongruent. I don't want to use that great big word, but they are in competition with one another, or they are in conflict with one another. And usually that is an attitude and a behavior. And so what Fessinger was saying was that when we have conflicting attitudes and behavior. I care about the environment, and yet I just littered, or I don't recycle, or I left the water running in my shower to take a long shower for, an hour and a half. All right, those two things, my behavior and my value, are incongruent. That creates an uncomfortable feeling. We call that cognitive dissonance, is what we call that. And when we feel this, what Fessinger is saying is that any two thoughts that are in conflict with one another, my behavior and my attitude, for example, any two thoughts that are in conflict with one another creates an uncomfortable feeling. But most often, the uncomfortable feeling occurs when that is an attitude that we have about ourselves. Let's see. Also, another example. Sorry, I gotta put my glasses on over here. Another example that I have here about some of the subtleties that we pick up on, or these nuances, and you can tell that these again are learned behaviors. However, because there's a significant number of individuals who buy into the same kinds of behaviors, you can also see that there's this hardwired aspect to it. But individuals were presented with a sign. I'm sorry about that light. It just does that all the time when I'm sitting here doing my recordings, and so hopefully the other lights are more complementary. That's what I wanted to say. All right, so two signs that have been put out there. One says, please don't cheat, and the other one says, please don't be a cheater. So one is focused on the behavior, please don't cheat, while the other one is focused on a characterization of the person. Please don't be a cheater. And so what Fessinger was saying is that the things that bother us the most are not just these ideas that are incongruent. Don't cheat. People shouldn't cheat. The ideas are incongruent. It has to do with when the ideas are about us. Am I a cheater? Those are the ones that bother us the most. They also did other studies in the same kind of area where they have done. Now here you can see nuances for our ability to bolster somebody's self-esteem. These are wonderful studies that we find in social psychology. And this study that's done about bolstering self-esteem was done in particular with African Americans. And African Americans suffer from what is called suffer. It's not really, it's like a condition. It's not a condition, but it has been conditioned. It has been conditioned and it has been learned over time. Those things, as we've all learned over time, those areas where we have deficits and where other people think we have deficits. So we can see those on an individual basis. There are individual differences. Like I very readily know my deficits, my shortcomings very quickly, right? They've been conditioned. And then as a people, because I'm 1/4 Mexican, I'm half Italian. As a culture, as a people, we also know certain stereotypes that go along with our culture or that go along with, so Italians, right? We have stereotypes. We have stereotypes that go along with Mexicans. We have stereotypes that go along with any minority. And those stereotypes include things like any minority, when presented in competition with certain skills, in particular intelligence. That's very often how we measure differences between individuals, right? In scientific studies, as well as in school, in all kinds of areas. So we readily know as an individual, my deficits academically and as a culture, and they become very apparent when I am set next to, in competition with, a superior or inferior culture. It works both ways. This is called stereotype threat. Stereotype threat. And so what that means is basically when the stereotype is salient in my environment, it's apparent in my environment, I'm in a condition where I am the minority and I have a majority here. Somebody that I have been conditioned to believe is superior, and in particular in intelligence or in intellect. All right? So that makes that difference, that subtle difference, it makes it apparent to me. There's a nuance that becomes apparent to me. We call that stereotype threat, is what it's called. And so when I'm in those conditions, like, so if I were to build self-esteem for, in particular, the examples with African Americans who readily know the stereotype, whether or not it's true of them is a different thing, but they readily know the stereotypes about their academic ability. So if I were to try and build self-esteem for an African American who is, in particular African American, who is performing poorly academically, the idea here is, in the study by Cohen in 2009 that was done, I said what we need to do is not boost academic skills, because that doesn't boost their self-esteem, because they readily know the stereotypes, whether or not they are the stereotype, whether or not they fit the stereotype, we readily know the stereotypes. Again, if I'm in that condition, the stereotype comes to mind, and what ends up happening is I act in unison with that stereotype. I fulfill that stereotype. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy is what it is for that stereotype when I'm in those conditions. Why? Because that comes to mind. I don't perform so well in these conditions. But what they did in order to truly boost the nuances of boosting self-esteem was that they boosted their self-esteem in areas outside of academics, that person did truly know that they were good at. And what ended up happening, so whatever it was, could be art, could be music, could be sports, whatever it was, that's what the study did. They boosted their self-esteem in that area, not in the area where they weren't doing well. And what ended up happening was this, that they improved their academic scores. Remember again that they were comparing African Americans to a control group. They increased their academic scores for 2 years after that study. So the lasting effects of boosting their self-esteem in subtle ways, understanding the nuances of self-esteem, allowed individuals to boost will allow us as individuals to boost self-esteem for other people in ways that are very beneficial. So what we can see here is that we react to the nuances of a situation, which are hardwired and they are learned. We react to the nuances of a situation, but it is also in understanding those nuances that we are able to change them, right? They change our perception, but not in the moment, because then what we're doing is forcing our agenda. We've got to understand the nuances so that what we are doing is we are refining ourselves in fire. Why in fire? Because we don't want to understand those nuances very often when we need to. And that is what sharpens our skills. It's understanding the nuances that we don't want to understand in order to sharpen our skills to have a better understanding of everything. We can see this going on so clearly. Individuals pushing their agenda in ways that don't allow us to understand the nuances of things like certain laws, right? Our democracy. I put these words down here somewhere, and I want to knowing me, I deleted the slide. Yeah. which is really disappointing because it's just an easy way for me sometimes to have examples ready for you when I have these notes on the slide. But why are these nuances so important? They are so important for things like, oh, I know where I put it in there. I put it in my, I know where it is. Hold on. You can read it in my, you can actually read it in my description. That's down below. I'm doing a few things over here. My description, that's down below. But nuances are important for understanding things like democracy. They're important for understanding things like law. They're important for understanding things like consequences to our health. They're important for understanding things like consequences to our behaviors. To being intimate with other people, right? We need to understand nuances in order for us to be intimate with other people. We need to understand nuances in order to understand who is trustworthy and untrustworthy. We pick up on these nuances all the time. Who is good for me? Who is bad for me? Is that the one that's on my eyeballs, or is it the other one? I gotta take off these glasses. Oh, there we go. So is this person good for me, or is this person bad for me? So we have to understand the nuances in order to understand those things. But again, when we begin to start paying attention to this, so you can see the theme right here. When we begin to pay attention to those nuances, right? So we are studying, is there a nuance on that person's face? That's dangerous. Now, I'm going to introduce you to a man, Paul Ekman, Dr. Paul Ekman, who has done studies. He started studies, and I've mentioned him before in past videos or podcasts. He has studied beginning with emotional expression and changes in emotional expressions, and then actually understanding and picking up what are called micro expressions and our ability to do this. And what he says is, yes, we can be trained in picking up those micro expressions, but what he says is you can never unlearn that. And that's a real important comment. You cannot unlearn when you learn those micro expressions, which means then you are cognitively processing what we typically pick up on a more intuitive level with other instincts that we have, those nuances that we are beginning to process, then those micro expressions that we're beginning to process on a cognitive level. And that he is even saying that's dangerous. So, and I'm saying it's hard to do no matter what. Let me see here. Oh, that's better, isn't it? A little bit better. Could use a lighting person. Okay, all right, moving on. So, could use a lot more than a lighting person. But I'm getting somebody who's going to edit these videos. All right, so let's take a look at this next study. And this next study was done on... watch me go back to that old study again. Yeah, and for the edited video, what we also know is this. So, insincere bolstering of children's self-esteem left them feeling worse. So it diminished their self-esteem. So insincere bolstering of children's self-esteem left them feeling worse. In fact, it diminished their self-esteem. And that was done by Brummelman and his associates and colleagues in 2014. So hopefully I'll have some of those research papers listed below, links to those research papers. And it really helps you understand a little bit more about research, because when there's a lot of people who are saying trust the science, let me tell you, as a scientist, once again, we trust the science. It's the scientists that we sometimes don't trust because they're not doing appropriate science. So basically I'm just kind of curious about placebo and testing the vaccines against a placebo and whether or not that should be done. So nuances. All right, so moving on. So in this study that was done, this study was done on cheating, and it was done on attitudes regarding cheating. So this also was a classic study done by Mills in 1958, and they looked at sixth grader attitudes of sixth graders on cheating. And so you can see here from this picture, what did they do? They measured their attitudes. So attitudes can be different. Some students said it's not a good thing. Others said, but it's not such a bad thing, right? So they got their attitudes towards cheating. And then what they did was they had conditions where they could cheat. Let me see here. Well, I don't know why I've got these different pictures up there. So there were two different conditions. There were one condition was where it was very easy to cheat and almost impossible to win without cheating. All right, so the conditions were that they wanted to win the game, and there were conditions where it was easy to cheat or it was very difficult to cheat, and it was almost impossible to win the game without cheating. And then what we found was there were some people that cheated and some people that did not cheat, okay? So they divided individuals into cheaters and no cheaters. So based on their opinions here, they divided individuals into cheaters and no cheaters. And then they made it easy or hard to cheat and almost impossible to win the game without cheating. And what did they find? That individuals' opinions changed because it was easy to cheat. And some people cheated and some people didn't cheat. It's not so unethical. I need this for a grade. Cheating is really wrong. Everyone loses. But what are they saying? They're saying that the opinions of cheating changed after they had an opportunity to cheat. It was easy to cheat and almost impossible to win the game without cheating. So those individuals who said, no, it's not a good thing to cheat, change their attitudes towards cheating. Change your attitudes towards cheating when their behaviors were in conflict with their attitudes, right? So I cheated, now my behaviors are in conflict with my attitude. Those who believed cheating was wrong before change their attitudes about cheating later on. Okay. So again, what we're saying is there are nuances that we pick up on. Liars, cheaters, what's ethical, what's unethical, what is beautiful, what is trash, right? How do we know that? How do we have this feeling about those things? We pick up on nuances. We can see part of that is hardwired, but we can see that over time we also learn to pick up on nuances. Because I'm telling you these things, again, what we're trying to encourage then is you taking a look at times where you are picking up on your nuances and they are correct, or when you're picking up on your nuances and they are incorrect. And that is refining and fire. It's not always easy to admit when our nuances were incorrect. In fact, most of us, like for example, when we read things like our horoscope, and we believe our horoscope, what we end up doing is very often, no matter what the horoscope said, we end up twisting the situation into the horoscope actually saying yes, or actually confirming what we believed. All right? Or what we believe about ourselves. So, when we learn that we do learn nuances and pick up on nuances, but we also can change our ability to see nuances truthfully if we don't refine our attitudes in the appropriate way. If I know that I'm liable to change my attitude if somebody characterizes me in an adverse kind of a way, right? So you're stupid for believing in this, right? So I might change my attitude. That's good to pick up on the nuances that people are beginning to spread, no matter where they are, right? On the fact that it's the uneducated that believe in certain ways, right? Or those individuals are stupid. You begin to pick up on the nuances of what we call propaganda, right? So that's what we're trying to refine. If we believe the propaganda, then chances are we're not thinking that we're wrong about the nuances, right? If we agree with the propaganda, we're saying yeah. But when we disagree with the propaganda, then are we listening to actual evidence, or are we going along with what they're saying? We're going along with the nuances instead of trying to pick things up ourselves. One of the things that first places I learned nuances about, or really to talk about them, was how individuals in societies that were totalitarian, so they were less democratic, right? In societies that are less democratic, they were better able to see nuances in their government. They were better able to, what they called, read between the lines. And that's what we're talking about. Nuances are your ability to pick up on these subtleties. We talked about values. We didn't talk about so much about feelings, but subtleties and differences in individuals' feelings. And also subtleties and differences in meaning as well. So this is one of the reasons why we want to choose our vocabulary carefully, so that we are really trying to convey exactly what we see to be truth, right? Because we want to convey the subtleties in meaning. And so another way to look at this topic is to think about it as your ability to read between the lines. When something isn't evident, do I really know what's going on? And we can always check that in hindsight. But what that takes is, once again, real courage to refine our attitudes, because we have this natural inclination to protect ourselves from this uncomfortable feeling when we feel that our attitudes are not really matching up, in this case, with what is right and wrong, with what is ethical. That's what we're talking about. Okay. And we can see here from this slide, what ended up happening is that the attitudes even became more extreme. For individuals who were cheating, who said cheating was a bad thing, they said, oh, please, it's no big deal. For those individuals who believed that cheating was not a big deal in the first place, and didn't cheat, for individuals who didn't cheat, their attitudes became more extreme with it's disgusting and cheaters needed to be expelled. Okay. So can we learn nuances? And the important thing that I've talked about here already is, yes, they can be learned. We learn to understand them by taking a careful and weighted look at ourselves. That's how we learn to see nuances. We end up being capable of weighing out differences in our attitudes and our behaviors. Most of our learning of nuances is going to come from our ability to be able to our ability to critically look at our own behaviors. And what that does is, and that's why it's called refining and fire, it hurts to look at our own behaviors objectively. And we have a natural inclination to not want to look at them. But then there are always these little voices in the back of our heads that are saying there is something just not right there. Do we go along then and push that thought out of our minds, or do we examine that thought? And is there something to that thought? And that's weighing the evidence. And that's what Fessinger is saying is very difficult for us to do. It's very difficult for us to see incongruencies about ourselves understand and weigh those incongruities, those conflicts that we have within ourselves, and try and understand them so that we can get to the truth, to the bottom line there, so we have a better understanding of what is real, and that is truth. When individuals say, and we've been taught and we've been learning this more often than not, we've been saying truth is relative. That's simply, even that statement, if that is true, then apparently truth isn't relative. Just by believing that statement, then truth wouldn't be relative, right? So what we need to do is really convince ourselves, first of all, that there is a truth, that things do happen one way or another, or that nuance that I discovered, right? That nuance that I believed, that when I read between the lines, I had a true or better understanding of what is really going on. And so what we end up seeing then is we end up seeing that there's a great importance then in understanding nuances. What it really does is it really helps us in our perception of what is true and what isn't true. And if you think that's unimportant, then the thing about that is going to be is that you're not going to be able to make accurate decisions. If I believe that somebody wants to be intimate with me and I've misread the nuances, I didn't read between the lines that he's only being a nice person, then that's going to leave me in an embarrassing or humiliating kind of position. We need to be able to confront our understanding of these nuances in order for us to be able to get the advantage of the nuances. Okay, and so one of the things also when I was preparing for this is I thought about, as I was preparing, I had recently listened to 1984. And so if any of you know this is George Orwell's book, 1984. And I think he wrote it in 1948, if I'm not mistaken. And so for the first time, and many of you probably have likely listened to it or seen it or read it. I think I'm pretty sure there's a movie, although I hear the movie's not really all that great. So many of you are likely familiar with it. And I'm not, and not as familiar, and
people, and then went off. We have
I want to get at a particular spot right here so that you can see this. And I closed this down, so it's just taking me just a minute to be able to get to this point. Let me see here.
You, Winston, we have broken you up. You have seen what you...
All right, I think here it is. And I'm going to turn this up just a little bit for you to hear. Now, again, okay, so if you have not read this book, or if you haven't seen the movie, or you're not familiar with it, there's a link to the audiobook. There's the audiobook that I listened to, and there it says there's the title of the book. It is really an incredible book. And just to kind of give you a little bit of an idea about this, the term Big Brother was coined in this book. So the first time it was used, so your understanding of Big Brother was because of this book by George Orwell. And so this is a book about creating Big Brother. And I want you to get again what he's talking about the nuances here. So what precedes this here is that there is they are trying to get Winston to comply. And what we know is that if you really want somebody to comply with you, that they can comply with you in their minds, right? They can tell you, yes, I agree with you. But in their hearts, they really don't agree with you, right? And that's what this book is really about. It's about the understanding that we can get people to comply in their behavior, and actually their behavior too. So we can get people to comply with their behavior. We can get people to even comply in their own minds. But to get them to comply in their own hearts is something entirely different, right? For you to really believe, you might say and do everything that they tell you, especially if they torture you. So this is what this O'Brien is doing. This O'Brien is torturing Winston in order to get Winston to commit to Big Brother, to buy into Big Brother, not only in his behavior, but also in his mind, but also in his heart. So now at this point, they have beaten him into what, and again, it's futuristic. He wrote it in 1948. It's futuristic. So some of the things are possible. Some of the things are less than possible, or probably possible, but maybe not in the same way, right? So sort of predicting this in the future, but not really something that actually happened, but likely could happen. And so, okay, so I want you to hear this. I want to get the volume up so that you can hear this. And so Winston has been beaten, and he's still not, even though he's complied, he hasn't complied with his heart. And this is what O'Brien is saying to Winston. And then we'll come back after what we hear here on the backside. Okay, so this is towards the end of the book.
This is what you accepted when you set yourself up against the party. It was all contained in that first act. Nothing has happened that you did not foresee.
He paused and then went on.
We have beaten you, Winston. We have broken you up. You have seen what your body is like. Your mind is in the same state. I do not think there can be much pride left in you. You have been kicked and flogged and insulted. You have screamed with pain. You have rolled on the floor in your own blood and vomit. You have whimpered for mercy. You have betrayed everybody and everything. Can you think of a single degradation that has not happened to you?
Winston had stopped weeping, though the tears were still oozing out of his eyes. He looked up at O'Brien. I have not betrayed Julia, he said. O'Brien looked down at him thoughtfully.
No.
He said.
No, that is perfectly true. You have not betrayed Julia.
The peculiar reverence for O'Brien, which nothing seemed able to destroy, flooded Winston's heart again. How intelligent, he thought. How intelligent. Never did O'Brien fail to understand what was said to him. Anyone else on Earth would have answered promptly that he had betrayed Julia. For what was there that they had not screwed out of him under torture? He had told them everything he knew about her. Her habits, her character, her past life. He had confessed in the most trivial detail everything that had happened at their meetings. All that he had said to her and she to him. Their black market deals, their adulteries, their vague plottings against the party, everything. And yet, in the sense in which he intended the word, he had not betrayed her. He had not stopped loving her. His feelings towards her had remained the same. O'Brien had seen what he meant without the need for explanation.
Now, I don't know to what extent that whole thing translated to you, but hopefully it did, and you can go back and listen to it. It was an extraordinary piece for me that I thought about regarding nuances. And so what he said was, so Winston said, we have degraded you beyond belief. We have gotten everything out of you. And what does he say? Can you think of a single degradation that has not happened to you? And what does he say? He said, I have not betrayed Julia. And here's the nuance. And what does he exclaim? He says, this O'Brien is so smart because I didn't even have to explain it to him what I meant. He understood the nuance. I never betrayed Julia. And despite the fact that Winston had told them everything that they had done, right? So in every single way, he had answered questions as if they were a betrayal of her. He had confessed what he says in the most trivial detail, everything that had happened at their meetings, all that he had said to her and she to him, and all of their black market deals and all of their adulteries and all of their plottings. He told them all. So how is it that he never betrayed Julia if he told them and confessed all the things that they had done together? What was the nuance that he had never betrayed Julia? The nuance of that was that in his heart, yeah, you can get me to say it. You can get my behavior to betray, but you can't get my heart to betray. And O'Brien knew it, and Winston knew it. And the nuance, despite all that had happened, didn't even have to be spoken because they both read between the lines. That's an incredible thing. So what is an advantage of understanding the nuances? Well, all kinds of things. In particular, in this day and age, you help protect your rights is what you do. Don't hand over your rights of thinking and your rights of your values over to other people who are telling you that if you don't think a certain way or if you don't feel a certain way, that you are stupid. We've done this for a very long time. We see the subtleties affect individuals in numerous ways. Even the subtleties of things like that you are academically more challenged simply because of your culture. We even did this, if you take a look at human zoos, which I have talked about in the past, an unbelievable video on YouTube that you can see that's done by Dr. John West. You can see how the subtleties in believing that individuals are less than human, which is what we did with slavery, the subtleties of that, the nuances, how that affects individual psyches for decades down the road. So nuances are important to understand because they help protect us, they help protect our rights, but they also, even more so, they help, again, my word is always edify us, because what we do is we understand and we can bear the truth, not only about what is going on, but we can learn to bear the truth about ourselves as well. So those are some advantages to understanding nuances. Now, what does it take to understand them then? How do we better understand nuances? And like I've said, I've already talked a little bit about this already, not a little bit, but actually quite a lot about this already. And so some of the things that we want to do is in order to understand nuances is let's take a look at some of the research that's out there, and are we pretty good at this or not? So the very first thing that we've studied in psychology is whether or not we know when somebody is lying. And this is interesting because what we have found out is that we are very good at reading very subtle nonverbal cues. But what ends up happening is when we put it in a laboratory, what we find is that people are very unsuccessful at telling whether or not people are lying. So what do we know? We know that under scientific conditions, experimental conditions, individuals really can't tell when other people are lying. Now, what we also know is this. We do know that we can train individuals to tell whether or not they are lying. And the individuals who train easiest are individuals who actually have a broad perspective. So it's not high intellect that actually trains individuals to tell whether or not they're lying. So engineers, biologists, physicists are not any better at interpreting whether or not people are lying, and in fact they have a hard time even being trained. Individuals who are trained and eat more easily, so it is trainable, but individuals who are more easily trained are psychologists, of course, also lawyers, because lawyers are used to seeing the nuances of what is going on, and so they are better able to determine whether or not individuals are lying. And also Secret Service agents are also easily trained to see if somebody's lying. Once again, why? Because they are able to pick up on a number of different perspectives, not put their own agenda before them, their understanding of the situation, right? They cannot put their own agenda there. I don't want anybody to shoot the president, and therefore nobody's going to shoot the president, right? These are biases that we have to learn to overcome in order to see the truth of nuances. And again, this helps us in our democracy. It helps us legally. It helps us in our intimate relationships. It helps us even understand some of the nuances of great art or delicious food even, right? Do you understand the subtle differences in the measures, right? Those are nuances. We can be trained. A chef is trained in some of those nuances. An artist is trained in those nuances. How do you get the shading? How do you get the nuance of a reflection of water, right, in my art? So You can be trained in those things. There is a skill that has to be there, but you also have to be okay with the fact that this is not it. That is not a reflection. It doesn't look like a reflection. You need to do it differently, right? You need to understand the nuances of what makes that a reflection and not push your own agenda. All right? Now, I started to talk to you about Paul Ekman in some of my other videos. I talk about him. Again, he is the guru in emotional expressions. And what he has done, what he has here, and that I picked up from the internet, from his website, is the evolution of lie detecting. And you can see here that what it's showing you, I found very interesting. And this is the reason why I put this up here. So there are times where individuals may be catching the nuances in lying. So here, this one, the very first one says, in China, a suspect was forced to fill their mouth with rice and then spit it out. If the rice remained dry, the suspect was found guilty. All right, so okay, rice, and then if it's dry, but think about this physiologically. You know, there are some things that we can look at and laugh at because other individuals do, but we can't disregard the perspective of where this might have come from. So putting rice in your mouth, and if you spit it out, it's dry as opposed to moist. Well, what would that suggest? That would suggest a dry mouth is what it would suggest, right? And if I have a dry mouth, that is characteristic of an individual who is lying. So I found that very interesting because there's a nuance. They may not have been able to explain the physiology like we know it today, and maybe they could, right? We don't know. Maybe they could. Maybe that's the reason why they did the rice test for lying. My mouth is dry. It gets dry when I lie. We know that's a physiological outcome of getting nervous, right? And we get nervous when we lie. And people aren't very good at lying. That's the reason why Secret Service can look through a crowd and catch somebody who's a criminal. Usually they can't hide the nervousness that they have that's associated with the guilt with their behavior. Okay. But not everybody feels guilty about their behavior, especially depending on how much they believe in their own behavior, right? All right, and then what we have there is, so that was in 1000 BC is what that was. We also see here, the next one, 300 BC, the Greek physician, and I'm not going to say it, Erasistratus. The Greek physician Erasistratus tried to detect deception by measuring pulse, a kind of precursor to the modern polygraph. All right, so that's pretty good. But then we go and we can understand, all right, pulse also is associated with this. So even though sometimes we may think about individuals having some crazy kinds of methods, we may just not be familiar with them or understand the methodology. So that makes sense. Here in the 11th century, though, what do we see here? Somehow we had some kind of decline in intellect, because here they were various trials by ordeal or God's judgment methods were used. And this, of course, is during the what we call the Dark Ages, although it's not really the Dark Ages if you look into it. But anyway, that's what we call it. So, and this is the time of the Crusades as well. So various trial by ordeal or God's judgment methods were used, including dipping suspects' hands into hot water to see if they were burned. All right, well, that doesn't make any physiological sense, and what that sounds more like is punishment. So here what we see in that instance in the 11th century is a good example, in my opinion, of individuals who really aren't trying to understand the nuances, but push their own agenda. And in the process, what ends up happening? The nuances elude us. So what are the nuances? Were these individuals being truthful or were they lying? It escaped them in the 11th century when they were using punishment. Why? Because they were pushing their own religious agenda. a wonderful example of what happens when you don't understand the nuances. You will never get to the truth. In that case of individuals lying or not, right? Being witches, for example. You won't get to the truth because you're not looking for the nuances. You're only focused on your own agenda. Okay, and then as we move on more to the present time here, we've got the 19th century here. We have phrenology and graphology. This is size of brains. So again, here they're claiming to determine someone's culpability by the contours of their skull and traits of their handwriting, for example. This again was another example of individuals. This again is another example of individuals who are pushing their own agenda. The phrenology camp came from individuals who had bigger brains, were smarter. And what they were trying to do is suggest that African Americans had smaller brains. And it was a measure, they were pushing their own nuance of a measure. They were using pellets that they were putting in skulls is what they were doing. And they were pushing these pellets down in what they knew to be skulls of European Americans and then fluffing them up basically. So saying, yeah, there's more capacity in a European American skull, and we know that is also associated with intellect. And that is simply not true, because elephants have bigger skulls but not greater intellect than human beings. So it's not true, but they were again pushing their own agenda. In the 20th century, we have the first polygraph was introduced in 1881 and elaborated throughout the 1900s. And then in the present, we've got PET scans and EEGs, which are helping us understand when individuals are shifting their thoughts, but not really whether or not individuals are basically characteristic of liars, for example. Okay, and then this last chart also came from Ekman as well, and this one talks about what do we need to really do in order to refine those skills that we have in order to better understand nuances. All right, so one of the things that I want to just talk a little bit about while we're looking at this chart is that we all have biases, as we've said before. Now, some of these biases are normal biases. They are normal responses to for example, to things that happen in our environment. So we have a normal bias towards things that are unknown. So we have a normal fear of those things that are unknown to us, that are strange to us. It's one of the reasons why when we are introduced to new cultures, sometimes we act in prejudicial ways. Why? Because we experience fear. Some of that fear is normal. Some of those biases are normal. As I've talked about before, some of the normal biases also include things like positivity bias. A positivity bias is that we have a tendency to see things as being more positive than negative, and especially things about ourselves. That really helps with our survival, doesn't it? So some of our biases are normal and some of our biases are very good, and they're very good for us. It is actually through conditioning, through learning, that we have biases that become distorted. Some of our biases are weaker than, I'm going to start with stronger. Some of our biases are stronger than what they should be. So some of us, if we've grown up in a hostile environment, will pick up on nuances for hostility more than we do on sincerity or empathy or kindness, right? If some of us are experiencing depression, we are going to pick up on biases that have to do with sadness, rumination. Maybe we notice the nuances of other couples that are in love, especially during the holiday season, right? So we pick up on these nuances that are distorted through conditioning. Why? I feel sad, so I pick up on nuances that are associated with sadness and depression. Okay? What about that we also can have biases that are weaker than what they should be? So imbalances in our biases that are weaker than what they should be. So for example, maybe we should be standing up and maybe we should be, or let's put it this way. Maybe we should be picking up on the nuances. Maybe we should be refining our skills a little bit better so that we are better able to read between the lines. When somebody is selling us propaganda, do we know it's propaganda? You know, one of the things I've been thinking about lately is that I grew up in an era, and I actually am a pretty private person. I put these things out there. These are for things for you to learn, and I do know that we connect with one another when we are intimate with one another. But growing up, I mean, we always learn that, you know, some of these opinions that we have may be different than other people's, so we should keep them private. Some of the things, our behavior that we wouldn't do in public, that we should keep those private. And we still have this inclination to keep those kinds of things about ourselves private, right? But then when we see other people who are posting all of these, what seems to be fairy tale lives that they have, or unrealistic kinds of lives that they have, we see individuals who are sharing these kinds of this information. We don't see that that might be biased. We're not reading the nuances that are there, and we can see the detriment that if we're not reading the nuances that are there, it can make us feel worse about ourselves, right? Some of these private things are better left kept private. And that's not to say that we should be burying secrets that shouldn't be buried, because trust me, I know firsthand that secrets shouldn't be buried. So and when we have inaccuracies then in our understanding of nuances, what that typically has to do with, again, is a conditioning for us to not want to see some piece of information. We've been conditioned to believe that this is true and this isn't true, and so we will never see the nuances of what is really true. Okay, all right. And so this last slide then, it gives you a list of things that we end up really looking at, and this list of things is from Paul Ekman. So this is a camera taking a close-up look, because remember, in order to catch the nuances, what we need to do is we need to become aware of, focus in on, attend to subtle differences. And some of those subtle differences are going to come up, for example, in facial expressions. And most of the time what we're picking up on in facial expressions are these micro expressions, and they are very often emotional. So they could be little micro expressions of anger. So they are the nuances, the subtle differences, right? They are a micro expression of thoughtfulness, that somebody's thinking about something deeply, right? Or there's a micro expression of somebody who looks like they are worried or curious, which can look very similar, but can you pick up on the differences between somebody who's worried and somebody who's curious, right? What about the tone of their voice? Is it loud? Is it soft? Go down the style. Is it formal? Is it personal? Right? So all of these are little expressions that help us pick up and refine. But again, if I focus in on them and think about, all right, I want to pick up on the nuances. I wonder if this person is sincere. So I'm going to focus in on the tone of their voice. Are they loud? Oh, wow, they seem like they're talking a little bit loud. I wonder why they're talking a little bit loud. Well, see how we can begin to read things into what is going on? So that really begins to make it difficult, and I hope you begin to understand how important but also how difficult it is to condition ourselves to begin to see nuances in what people are saying, right? Because I can't just simply focus in on your tone of voice, or I can't just simply focus in on your body posture, which may be crossed arms, which I sit with my arms crossed all the time, but nobody would say that I'm a closed person, right? I give you information very freely. I'm very open. So if you focus in and begin to think I'm an expert at reading micro expressions, I'm going to study them and I'm going to get the nuances so I know what they're thinking and they're feeling. Or I'm really an expert at body language. I'm really an expert at body language. I've read a book on it, so individuals who are standing with their hands on their hips, this is a proud pose, right? If I'm looking down like this is a submissive pose. So I know these things, right? And so therefore I am pretty good at the nuances. No, you cannot focus in on them. And the best strategy to use to begin to refine your understanding of the nuances, to begin to read between the lines, is to be able to look at yourself and the nuances of your own behavior. If you can change your own behavior and understand the nuances of your own behaviors, right, that you may have a tendency to bias yourself, and then weigh the evidence the way that you should, that's how you then begin to instinctually and intuitively pick up on the nuances of other individuals. It is not simply because you focus on them, because you are being conscious of them. It is something that you have trained yourself to intuitively pick up on because you have refined yourself and looking at truthful nuances as well. That's it for today. That is my talk on nuances. So, thank you for joining me. I am Dr. Annette Feravich. Let me get my ticker out. I am Dr. Annette Feravich with Healthy Mind, Body, Spirit. Please look for me on the internet. But even right now, more importantly, please find me on YouTube, Dr. Annette Feravich. Please subscribe because that boosts up the algorithms, right? And I need to boost up those algorithms because I think I'm saying some important things, and I don't think that people are out there doing and saying the same exact things that I am. But if you do find that other people are saying the things that really are at the core of your heart and reflect the nuances of your values, for example, make sure that you do like those videos and you subscribe to those videos and you share those videos so other people can like them and subscribe to them. This really helps change the algorithms. We have a lot of people who are making a lot of decisions for us, and what we really want to do, no matter what your opinion is you really want to make sure that you are supporting other, in particular, experts who have the same opinion that you do. You want to make sure that you are supporting other experts that have the same opinion you do. When experts see that people on Facebook are fighting with one another and they are causing great division between one another, it's very easy to shut down individuals. It's much more difficult to shut down individuals who have experience or who have knowledge, who are scientists, who have an understanding of the nuances and have the expertise. It's very difficult to shut down experts. It's very easy to shut down individuals who are arguing amongst themselves and claim misinformation or claim that these individuals don't know what they're talking about. When you get your weight behind individuals who have credible evidence, and there are plenty of individuals out there, no matter what your ideas are, that have good evidence, I can find them. They're not all getting suppressed, right? And so make sure that no matter what your voice is, that you are trying to support the experts in that area. Don't support the arguments. Don't support the divisiveness. Support what the experts are saying. And if the expert's voice gets to stay out there and has more and more support, that is what's going to get heard, not the chaos that's going on and is being reflected of society today. We can clean this up. We can do things differently. And so it's got to be a hierarchy. A lot of times we don't like that. You've got to put your weight and your support behind experts who are saying the same thing that you are in order to get people to understand the nuances of what is real value, of what is real meaning, and what is real truth. Again, thank you. You can always email me, and I'd love to hear your comments on email. So please email me at Dr. at healthymindbodyspirit.net. So Dr. F as in Frank, ERA, V as in Victor, ICH. See it below there. Make sure you click the likes. I'll go over here. Make sure you click the likes. Make sure that you subscribe, and please make sure that you share these videos. Have a great evening, and I will see you next Sunday. And next Sunday, it is going to be the day after New Year's. So we're going to see what we have prepared for New Year's, which is likely going to be my upcoming agenda for my next series. Any ideas on a series, please make sure you email me. Any questions about healthy mind, healthy body, healthy spirit, make sure that you connect with me and email me. And also, finally, this is it. And also, finally, take a look at what is going to be coming on for 2022 for Shackley Sales. As you know, I am a real believer in good health, and I want you to make a commitment to good health, and I will help you get on your way to good health. The very first thing you might want to think about is doing a cleanse in January. If you are committed to a healthy mind, a healthy body, and a healthy spirit, first of all, stick with me, and I will get you there. But second of all, please know that Shackley is the nutrition that has been tested and will get you there as well. So, Dr. Annette Feravich with Healthy Mind, Body, Spirit, thank you for joining me. Have a great evening and enjoy your week.